Hello everyone, it's me, Mason Lane. We're here today in the Gray Gun Shop in Reedsport, Oregon. We're going to be going over today a little bit of an armorer's guide and a full disassembly and install video. But we're going to do a little bit of an intro to that first, talking about a few different things, mainly the factory's perspective on regular maintenance and at what mileage marker most of those things need to happen. So big disclaimer first, anything you do, armorer's maintenance is defined as anything beyond taking the fire control unit out of the frame and the slide away from the frame, basically. So if you're taking apart the slide, you're taking apart the intricacies of the fire control unit, that constitutes armorer's level maintenance, and you need to be a certified armorer to not void your warranty in doing that work. So if you're going to be taking advantage of doing any of these installs yourself or taking your gun apart to that level of detail, you need to be at peace with the fact that you're going to void your warranty. That's just how it is, okay? Let's get into some more stuff. Factory recommends at 5,000 rounds a full detailed inspection by a certified armorer to go through every individual part, inspect for spring wear, inspect for damage, just to replace stuff as it comes up, okay? You're gonna find that a lot of things around that mark start to really wear out. Sear springs are not intended to really go for much longer than that. In a lot of cases, sears, the finish will start to degrade and you'll lose quality in a lot of different areas. Those are just two examples, but a lot of things are gonna come up there on the ground, regardless of what they recommend from a legally proper standpoint. 10,000 rounds, recoil springs need to get replaced. A lot of other stuff, if you're not doing regular maintenance, is going to start to come up there too, obviously. At 20,000, a lot of the critical important pieces that are, wearable are going to start to really go, and that's why they recommend replacing them. You're probably going to want to replace them before then, in my opinion. Extractor assembly, that includes the extractor, push rod, spring, and follower piece there. All that needs to get replaced. Your striker assembly, they don't sell those as individual parts anymore. They sell the entire assembly already put together. So you can get one of those. There's a few parts specifically that are gonna wear out. Most of the rest of them will actually be fine, but we'll get into that in the video, and most likely you won't be able to source the parts to replace just the stuff that's broken. Your takedown lever, just because it helped with your barrel lockup to maintain accuracy and it takes such a beating from your guide rod, that's gonna start to wear out around that mark too, so you're gonna wanna replace that. But there's a lot of ebb and flow to all these different things. A lot of stuff is going to wear out earlier than it might necessarily indicate on this chart. So let's get into the actual video. We'll go through sort of how to take some of the stuff apart, a little bit of install information for the Gray Guns parts, and hopefully you'll learn something cool. Okay, let's get to it. Okay, the front sights in these things on the Legions, they recently, well not so recently, but like a year and a half ago, they started MIM'ing them instead of machining them. So the finish on them sucks a little bit. Compared to the old Dawson precision sights, but you can fix that just by inverting a lighter, like a Bic lighter, and using the smoke to black them out, which is a nice temporary fix, or you can reblue them or whatever. Obviously, make sure you extract your fiber before you do that. The barrels on these are pretty good. Some of the generations of Legion barrels are not so hot. Usually the early run where they have that LCI, the loaded chamber indicator where there's a port, some of them are less accurate than others, frankly. But if you get a new barrel and it has that solid line, or if you have an older generation X5 barrel, they'll be perfectly accurate, dead nuts. I found that the chambers on these are kind of loose. So if you're using coated bullets, I recommend using .356 profile bullets. I use 147 grain blue bullets that are 356 profile, and they work really well. They're extremely accurate. If we're using Jack and Browns, usually not so much a problem. Like I said, these guns are dead nuts accurate. They just happen to be chambered a little bit more loosely. Moving backwards down the slide, you will break parts in your striker, which frankly you cannot buy and replace. The striker return spring, which actually causes the striker to, once it pops out of the front of the breech face, it causes the striker to return back. They will break, but just by having a small malignant mass of metal in the channel where they belong, even once they completely get crumpled, it'll still get the job done 99% of the time. The only way I've ever seen them fail is when they get so crunched up that when you go to load the gun manually, if you ease it back into battery, sometimes the firing pin will poke out the front of the breech face, and in that case it'll get stuck on top of the round so that it can't slide up in chamber. But that's not something that I've ever experienced as a problem in live fire, only whenever loading the gun. So you can decide whether or not that's a problem. I personally change recoil springs annually. That's not recommended, but it's what I do, and they still work fine. And these things are pretty hard to kill overall. Extractors, obviously something that you want to have on a regular maintenance schedule because it's a critically important part in the gun. But I've seen them get pretty worn and not break. I mean, I've seen it to the point where it's an obvious visible crescent when you hold it across the room and squint, and it still continues working. So when they start to get visibly worn, So you can see this guy right here. I don't know if you can actually see it or not, but you can see it has a pretty obvious indentation to it, especially if you look at it from this direction, right? And it's still working fine. So theoretically it should get changed, but on the ground it's working good. Change your springs every 5,000 rounds. Change out your extractors when they start to look visibly worn. Moving into the frame. The main thing that can go wrong in the frame, besides just general spring wear, is the fact that the sear springs are very difficult to install correctly, and that makes it so that if you don't install them correctly, the whole gun will not work. So I'll actually get specifically into this here. And the rest of that will fall right out. So I don't know if it's going to be easy to see, but the sear springs on these things rest on little posts that are on the actual underside of the sear. So it sits in the gun like this, the slide runs this way. But they run on these tiny little posts, and they run in this channel that keeps them, the both of them separated. So there's a little like rib right here that runs down the back of that channel. And if you don't get those springs in there, in that channel seated nicely, if you let them cross up or contact in the install process, things go very badly and they'll wear off very quickly. And generally speaking, your sear springs that should last like, you know, 4,000 or 5,000 rounds last like 60 rounds. Sears, I think I recommend changing like every, I don't know, say 5 to 10,000 rounds. In a lot of cases, the electrolysis of the nickel finish will start to wear off. You can actually see that on this gun, only it's so covered in grease I can't get at it. But if you look very closely, you can see that the actual finish is sort of chipping and wearing off right there, which needless to say is not right. I'm gonna throw this thing back together and show you this sort of the tip I'm talking about when it comes to making sure your sear is installed correctly. Perfect, okay? So now to make sure I actually did that right, I'm gonna take my punch, my 5/32 punch, and I'm gonna push on the back of this sear surface right here. And if it feels like, you know, like a good double action trigger, right? If it feels like it goes smoothly all the way down to the bottom without a bunch of grinding and hitching, I'll know for the most part that I have that thing in there properly, right? And you can listen to it too, right? There's no sound coming off of that. Not that I necessarily know you'll be able to pick it up on a camera anyway, but it feels like a perfectly smooth action all the way down, which is exactly what you're looking for. That means those springs are not grinding on each other, okay? Transfer bar, back in. All that to say, these things do not break, right? It takes, honestly, an act of God to cause a malfunction, short of, it takes an act of God, short of a malfunction caused by spring wear to make these things mess up. Yeah, that's pretty much it. Make sure you run .356 bullets if you're running coated bullets. Make sure you change out your extractors every so often, but even if they're worn, they won't break. Your striker return springs will break, but you don't need to fix them. Make sure you replace them every 20,000 rounds of the entire assembly, and you should be good. These things are pretty ironclad. It's a huge part of the reason I use these things is for reliability, beyond just the fact that they shoot great, okay? Thanks for watching. Watch more of my videos in the future here. This Armorer video, this is gonna be like sort of an owner's guide. I'm thinking I'm gonna go through an actual Armorer video as far as how to take apart all of the top and bottom and what other things go wrong. But until next time, thank you.